Okay, so this has been a video I've been wanting to do for some time because it's something that comes up a lot, of course, talking with other people within the Flat Earth community. Whether it's in comments or emails or just, it's inevitable that this whole issue of engaging with the rest of the world, friends and family and people online and just the whole spectrum, and trying to approach this topic, you learn this amazing realization, this amazing truth, and you want to share it with everyone, and it's natural. So you're then faced with the isolation and the mockery and the debates and all the naysayers and the quote unquote debunkers and all the rest. So it's a very big topic, and of course the whole purpose of apologetics in general, when we say this in the Christian context, is because it's all about showing the evidence to point people to the reality of God and to the veracity of the Bible. And the whole point is to try and make people think, to try and get them to question their worldview and question their current paradigm or whatever, and consider something that otherwise perhaps on their own they would not consider. So that's the whole point of apologetics, and I think that's been probably why flat earth and cosmology has fascinated me since I started seriously looking into it, because right away it seemed quite apparent that this is just this whole sort of undiscovered or lost to history, this whole facet of Christian apologetics and biblical apologetics that of course now is being blown wide open again. So, there's all the typical things that we talk about when it comes to flat earth proofs, and whether it's the biblical side and all the verses, or on the experimental scientific side with things like curvature and lack of rotation, lack of motion, all the NASA fakery and all the typical things. So one thing I did want to talk about, though, is because sometimes when you're talking to certain sets of people, certain types of people that are perhaps, in your family or longtime friends or whatever, and they hit that wall, which is sort of the conspiracy wall, you can't even, you want to talk to them, or they want to talk to you, or they want to, try and convince you that this is nonsense or whatever. So you're kind of forced to talk about it sometimes. But so it's the question of, like, what do you do? What are some good tools that we can use to engage in those conversations, but they won't entertain any of the, if they haven't even stepped foot over that line in terms of worldwide conspiracy, or the Masons, or the Jesuits, or any of that stuff in 9/11, if they haven't even tread those waters yet, the moon landing stuff. So where do you go? What is a good approach to take in that situation? And so one of the things that I've been thinking about and talking about with a good friend of mine a number of times is just, he was telling me, I keep coming back to this because it's so simple and yet it's so good, but it's really just the question of NASA and the whole space paradigm and the whole agenda of space exploration and space travel, and just the simple question, especially if you're talking to a fellow Christian or creationist who wants to esteem the Bible and the creation narrative, but at the same time is defending NASA, right? And we all know these people, right? And I've done many, many videos talking about Dr. Jason Lyle and Danny Faulkner, and of course the quote-unquote Christian astronauts like Jeff Williams, who of course are all coming front and center and defending this idea that the Bible and NASA are totally compatible, and that there's no conflict at all, really. So this, I think, is an area that is just ripe for questioning and challenging the person with this assumption, because again, if they're not even going to give you the time of day when it comes to the conspiracy as well, then maybe so you got to step back a little bit and meet them at the level that they're at, right? Is it with apologetics in general or any of that? Asking questions is really, I think, the main thing that you're trying to do, period. Oftentimes when we get into engaging with people talking about flat earth and cosmology, a lot of times it turns into this thing where they're just firing questions at you, the crazy flat earther, and you're trying to answer them and field them as best you can, and you're kind of always backpedaling, and of course they always gravitate to those ones where we don't necessarily know a lot of the answers. Yeah, there's some things that are, they think are such good debunking questions, and there really is ridiculously simple answers like, how do you travel around the whole world if it's flat? There are simple answers to a lot of those questions, but a lot of them, yes, there's a lot of mystery left to it, and if they're the one asking all the questions, that's really not, it's not where you want to be, and it's not where we need to be, because the thing is that the whole Copernican paradigm is really just begging to be questioned and taken. And as soon as you start doing that, as most of you know, it starts to just fall apart. So it's this question of, okay, this is a way that you can come at it with lots of different little specific ways, but just as a whole is a great thing to just start here and start to ask some really general questions that are going to stick in their brain, and it's not really about trying to win a debate in the moment or win an argument then and there. It's just you're planting seeds, right? You're getting them to think, and it's going to just be like a burr in their saddle, and they're going to go away and probably chew on it for a while. But that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to plant those nagging questions that once it's planted in there, and then they start seeing this for themselves, and they start looking at the material from a new way, it'll start to just kind of work on its own, right? So with NASA and space, right, when we're dealing with this whole Christian NASA paradigm, right? Oh, space, when we look at guys like Jeff Williams, and it's so interesting because when he goes around and speaks at these, churches and does conferences and all these presentations, showing all these pictures that he claims to have taken from the ISS with his big fancy camera. And so it's all about the Earth, right? It's all about, oh, it's so amazing, and God made this for us, and it's so beautiful, and and it's like, who can argue with that, right? God made this for us. He's glorifying God. But really, what we have to start doing, I think, when we're engaging with people who are really into this stuff is forcing them to stop just compartmentalizing NASA and this whole space paradigm the way that we do, compartmentalizing it into just, oh, from a Christian standpoint, we're just going to kind of pick and choose the elements we want to focus on and applaud. Like, oh, look at all these beautiful pictures, and oh, look at God's beautiful creation, and look at how perfectly made everything is, and all the stuff they try and say. And you have to really blow it open to the whole NASA agenda, because really it's not just this moment in time where, oh, look how amazing it is that we can send people up and they can fly 260 miles above the globe, the alleged globe, and take pictures of this beautiful world that God made. But even though it's all CGI, but really there are so many things that we can point to with NASA, because it's all about, well, what's next? Where's it going? And that's the point where I've yet to hear any Christian, any of these astronomers, any of these creationists who are all, so appalled by flat Earth and just can't bring themselves to question NASA at all. Where do you get off the train? Because it's going where? We're going to Mars, we're going to Europa, we're going to all these different moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and the whole idea of exploring the solar system is, to what end? Because then that just bleeds into the whole search for extraterrestrial life. And, these are not just theoretical, hypothetical questions. These are serious things that they're spending millions of dollars and putting forth a lot of material and, seriously looking for. So, those of us who understand this whole alien deception narrative, this is something that we have to start challenging people. Like, you can't just, again, it's the compartmentalization thing where, oh, well, maybe God did make, other beings or whatever, we don't know. But they don't really want to think about it in terms of like, well, what happens on that day if NASA does, make some announcement that they've actually found life on, one of Jupiter's moons, or they do get a signal from, deep space, just like they show in the movie Contact, that was written by Carl Sagan. SETI is a real thing. They really do have radio telescopes pointed at, all the different corners of the quote-unquote universe, and they're waiting for a signal every day. I mean, that scenario realistically could happen every day, which is kind of ties into the whole idea of the electromagnetic deception, right? Because how hard would it be for fallen interdimensional spiritual beings to quote unquote beam a signal, an electromagnetic signal from the heavens, from the sky. Oh, it's from space. Well, is it really from space? So yeah, but the whole issue of space and space travel is one too that when you really take a closer look at it, you realize that it's sort of designed to inevitably migrate into the transhumanist agenda. Like, there really is no such thing as realistic space travel, and they all admit this. I mean, you can listen to Bill Nye, you can listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson.
All right, the fastest hunk of hardware we have ever launched is the mission to Pluto right now, the New Horizons mission. It's going at like 4 times escape velocity from Earth, and it's going to leave the solar system after it swings by Pluto. It'll get to Pluto faster than any spacecraft ever would have gone that distance. It's a tiny spacecraft on the largest engines in our arsenal. You combine those two facts, laws of physics say this thing is going to be hauling, okay? It's going to get to Pluto by 2015. If you hitched a ride on that, it's the fastest thing we've ever launched. If you just grabbed on and didn't worry about food or want to come back or anything like that, at that speed, you would reach the nearest stars in about 35,000 years. So, we are hopelessly bound to the solar system in this regard. The distances between stars is vast. We would need to understand something new about the fabric of the space-time continuum and exploit that in order to expect to travel to the stars.
And they all openly admit that, like, outside of the, even in their model, even in their whole belief system, leaving the solar system is pretty much impossible unless we figure out a way to live a really, really long time and become almost immortal, or to transcend the limitations of physics, of time and space, and use wormholes or interdimensional travel, or, as Jason Silva is constantly talking about, the whole idea of consciousness technology, for lack of a better word. That's really, at some point, the quest to explore outer space evolves into the quest to explore inner space. Then, of course, it bleeds into the technium and the singularity, and the technological transhumanism is a part of the space agenda transhumanism. They're really one and the same, and this is why I'm always coming back to Jason Silva, because he's openly admitting these things. And so this is something else you could try too. Is if you have a stubborn family member or somebody who just thinks you're so crazy, sit them down, and if they won't watch fake moon landing stuff, or they won't watch, if they're not into, if they refuse to watch anything that's remotely conspiratorial, then say, okay, let's watch this guy. He's a mainstream guy. He's on the National Geographic Channel. He's worked for Google. He's worked for NASA. He's a spokesman for all these corporate/government entities and everything. Make them sit down and watch Shots of Awe and torture them. But then, challenge them if they really buy into this, because this is really, where else can it go? Where else can the space narrative go other than pushing the message of, technologically mediated apotheosis? And is that something that because if you're talking to a Christian or somebody who has any semblance of biblical, there's a lot of people out there that they're fully not down with the transhumanist agenda. So that's maybe the starting point. You start with, you have a connection with, we both agree that transhumanism is a satanic agenda, that it is a Luciferian deception. Okay, we have that down. Make that your starting point, and then work your way backwards. And then constantly be asking them, so what is the world pushing? And does the NASA paradigm conflict with that, or does it actually go right along with that? And it's pretty easy because there's so much to work with. I mean, good grief. I mean, just last night I saw this commercial. It's an Adidas commercial. I'd never seen it before, and it's like full of all this bizarre and occult symbolism in there. It's pretty obvious. And then at the end of it, it's like they do this little montage, all these symbols of like the Vitruvian Man, and one of them is the Vitruvian astronaut. And the Vitruvian Man, there you go again, is it's essentially it's an occult symbol, going back to the whole idea of apotheosis, and of course scoring the circle, which I've dug into in the documentary Ethereal. So you see these things, you see these connections all over the place. Maybe that's an inroad, maybe that's a starting point that you could actually gain some ground. It's always good to try and kind of figure out where you have a level of connection with somebody, a level of agreement with somebody. With some people, they already fully get all the conspiracy stuff. They already get that there's the Illuminati and Freemasonry and Kabbalah and Theosophy. Maybe they get all that, but then a lot of them, for whatever reason, then stop short of being able to actually question that they could lie about something as big as the globe, right? So then with those people, you have to come at it, from a different angle. Everyone is kind of where they're at, and that's where you have to start. So it's always about trying to find those really good questions. This is something I think about a lot, whether it's like, I've many times wondered, like, okay, if I was at one of those presentations with Jeff Williams or Danny Faulkner or Jason Lila, if I was actually in the audience and they were having a Q&A session or whatever, which they often do, what kind of question would I ask? If I had one question, would I make it something just over the top, like, why are you such a lying Masonic dirtbag or something? Right, I would be immediately escorted out the door, and it's not going to do anyone in the audience any good, or the speaker or anything. It's not, I'm the crazy conspiracy theorist, right? So the opportunity would be wasted, unless I am able to find a more subtle and more challenging way of asking a question that, doesn't have those overtones, doesn't have any of those trigger words or trigger ideas in it, has no tinge of conspiracy accusations, right? But was just this is probably what I would ask any of those guys is, how does the bigger picture, the bigger agenda of space travel, which they're saying is physically impossible in your physical body, it would require hyperdimensional abilities, hyperdimensional travel. It would require transhumanist ideals. It would require, transhumanist achievements in order to even continue pursuing it. So how does that fit into your Christian worldview? How does that fit into, your eschatology? How does that fit into, and this is what I think we can legitimately ask friends and family who, they don't want to touch the conspiracy stuff yet. So you've got to challenge them on their ground, on their footing that they think is so solid, because it's not. You got to ask the questions that get them to think. I don't know what they would say. I think, I've seen Jeff Williams get asked. He was asked a question in a Q&A once by somebody who was asking about what's it like being a Christian with, working for an organization like NASA that is obviously, teaching evolution and all this stuff. And he really just kind of hummed and hawed and more or less dodged the question and kind of said something about how working with some of the Russian cosmonauts, they're like Russian Orthodox, and so sometimes he's able to ask him a little question about God or whatever, and that they're all very respectful, and it hasn't really been an issue. But it was like, it was such a pitiful kind of the question was a legitimate question in terms of the broader agenda of NASA is what, and how do you reconcile that with your Christian beliefs, your supposedly Christian beliefs? But yeah, of course, Jeff Williams is a really interesting guy, because obviously when it's the creationist guys, the astronomers, they really just believe and they refuse to question. But with these guys going up on the fake ISS, we're talking about people who are sitting in front of the green screens and hanging from wires, and so it would be really hard to not say anything about the fact that they're involved in such a elaborate deception, an elaborate hoax. But in a way, you kind of have to know that that's almost like what they want you to do. They want you to just say those trigger words. They want you to say those weaponized terms so that they can just write you off and escort you out the door, whether literally or figuratively. But we can challenge and question their false, self-contradictory, compartmentalized positions. And that's where, with a lot of people, that's what you have to do. So, thanks for listening.